So I'm Jeremy Smith from TIBCO Labs. I work in the office of CTO, and I'm here with Hugo Peters, who's also in our team in the office of the CTO. So today, I'll show you this disclaimer. We're going to talk about building smart apps with the TIBCO Cloud Starters Toolkit. So the idea of this session is that myself and Hugo are going to take you on a kind of quick tour of this framework. It's an open framework for creating apps on TIBCO Cloud. We'll show you what the toolkit does, what it offers, and then Hugo's going to give you a great demo to show you how easy it is to kind of get started and start creating apps on TIBCO Cloud. Excuse me. So let's start with kind of an overview of what TIBCO Cloud is. So TIBCO Cloud is our cloud native environment where we offer the core TIBCO product capabilities, but as services that you can consume for your own kind of customer business logic. So you can use kind of leverage, you can leverage like these key capabilities like integration, APIs, analytics that you expect from TIBCO, but you can use those as services whilst you concentrate on the kind of business logic of your app. So how do we get started creating business apps for TIBCO Cloud? Well, when you log into TIBCO Cloud, you'll see this kind of home screen, and you'll notice on the right hand side there's a solutions button. If you go ahead and click solutions, then you'll be presented with information about the toolkit and indeed some sample apps that you can kind of get started and take a look at. Okay, so the TIBCO Cloud Starters Toolkit is really there to extend TIBCO Cloud to help you create these smart applications. It's built and maintained by our team in TIBCO Labs, and we regularly update the toolkit as we have more and more capabilities available on TIBCO Cloud. So what exactly is in the toolkit? Well, the toolkit's aim is really to help you get started fast. And when we say get started fast, we're talking about enabling developers to leverage the kind of TIBCO capabilities to create their own applications. So with that in mind, and with a developer focus, we're providing templates, samples, and libraries. So the toolkit is really about generating code and providing kind of the tools and the CI/CD support to help you create your applications quickly on TIBCO Cloud. But being able to delegate the kind of server-side services like the integration code and the analytics capabilities to the products that TIBCO offer to you. And the idea there is to kind of give you a very business specific application that you can tailor yourself, but you can rely on the kind of enterprise grade server side components that you need to keep your business apps running. Once you create a solution, you can actually directly upload it to TIBCO Cloud and we host it and run it for you as well. So these are just some of the key capabilities that we provide as part of TIBCO Cloud Toolkit. We provide templated apps, so that's source on GitHub, fully open. Libraries that we host on NPM to help you kind of connect to our different tools such as analytics and low code. Building blocks, so it's code generation. So we basically use kind of schematics to generate parts of your own code, and you'll see that shortly. And of course, there's extensive documentation and a supporting CI/CD pipeline so that you can actually deploy your apps to production. Okay, probably the best way to understand what you can do with the Starter Toolkit is to look at some of the applications we've already created. So I've got a few applications here on the screen. I'm going to start with the top left one. We actually created this for a company called City Harvest in London. You may or may not have heard of City Harvest, but they're actually a charity, and their sole aim is to try and distribute surplus food to the people most in need in London. And this partnership with City Harvest started at the start of the COVID pandemic, when they had a huge surplus of food from closing restaurants and hotels, and they really needed to be able to distribute that food quickly to the people that really needed it. We kind of saw TIBCO Cloud with its analytics and low code capabilities as an excellent place to provide that kind of platform. So we very quickly, within days and weeks, created an application for City Harvest where they can actually see where the food is, where the need is, and the food banks can actually go and register and tell City Harvest what they need, and then they can arrange the deliveries of the food as required to get that food to the right people. On the right hand side, there's the GatherSmart solution at the top. That's another great example of an application that's quickly started to address issues at the start of the COVID pandemic. I'll come back to that one in a sec. The one on the bottom left is student engagement, so customer churn kind of example. And that combines not just analytics and low code, but also complex event processing. So let's go into some detail with TIBCO GatherSmart. So GatherSmart is a solution that we built to help with COVID, really to help get customers, employees back to work. So it's basically two key applications. There's a mobile app and there's a control center. The mobile app is what employees use. They install it on their phones, and when they want to go to the office, they answer some questions that are set up by the company, and that gives them a passport which they can scan to get into the office. The control center is used by the HR and personnel departments of the company. They determine what the rules are, the business rules, i.e. the questions that they need to ask to kind of drive the mobile app, and they can also manage employees and manage access to the office. So GatherSmart works by kind of combining multiple TIBCO Cloud capabilities. You combine low-code case management with analytics and business rules. So HR are really using the system by setting the questions, the business rules. Employees are then onboarded automatically. An employee receives an invitation which they click, they install the app, and when they want to go to the office, they answer questions, they get a passport, and they scan that passport to get into the office. There's a number of screens that the control center provides for the HR departments, and they're really kind of in two flavors, an analytics flavor and a case management flavor. So the analytics flavor kind of lets the HR resources visually see information about where their employees are and where they are in the offices. This kind of side is also used to actually bring in external data, so they can bring in the latest kind of COVID case information and kind of merge that with their employee locations, so that they can then make live decisions on whether offices should be open and whether they need to ask additional questions to their employees before they come to the office. So it's very much an actionable analytics kind of application there. And then the case management side lets them actually see in detail who the employees are, where they are, and ask them to do things like fill in a survey or ask them not to come to the office and so forth. The solution is, oh, I've just lost PowerPoint, give me a sec. The HR side of GatherSmart, and it's where we define the business rules. So there's a very graphical capability that we created as part of the application to help you control our cloud events, rules management, but in a visual way to set up the questions, and the customers can literally go in and set up these questions and workflows that their employees have to answer visually. Okay, so before we move on to the demo, just to recap, the Cloud Starters Toolkit is there to help you create applications quickly on TIBCO Cloud. There's a number of resources you can go to. GitHub's a great place to start. You can see all the code, and there's links to the documentation side. And you can also check out the TIBCO Labs page and, of course, the TIBCO community. So with that in mind, let me switch over to Hugo, and he can give you a demo of the TIBCO Cloud Starter Toolkit in action.
Thank you, Jeremy, for sharing the wonderful applications we can create with the Cloud Starter Toolkit. And in this demo, I actually want to show you how to create your own application. So we'll basically start with the Cloud Starter Toolkit, the prerequisites, how to get started, and also an installation command to install the CLI. And we'll basically start with a completely empty environment. So I'm using Visual Studio Code here, but you could also do this from your terminal, or you could use WebStorm or Eclipse or any kind of IDE that you like. And after you've installed this CLI, you can basically check if it works by running it -v to see what the version is. And then if you run the CLI in an empty folder, it will basically give you an option to create a new cloud starter. So if we say, okay, we want to create a new cloud starter, it will ask you a number of questions. So for example, what is the name of the cloud starter? So we're going to give it the name OSS demo. And then it gives you a number of options of the template that you want to use. And the template is kind of the starting point for your cloud starter. And those templates are all available on GitHub. And while this is all running, while it's setting up our environment, we're going to have a look at the TIBCO Cloud, and we're going to have a look at Live Apps. So Live Apps is let's say, capability within the TIBCO Cloud, where you can create like small little applications. So this is one of the sample applications where we create orders. So we have creators and actions, and then we have a, let's say, state model where order goes through the different states, and all those green arrows you see here are basically the actions that bring an order from one state to the next state. Then we define a little data model. So we define basically our data items. So let's say a product of the type integer, or a quantity of integer, and we basically can also define our own types. Let's say, for example, address. But if you want to know more about live apps, I would recommend you to go to the TIBCO Cloud, sign up for a free trial, and you can play with live apps. Now, live apps comes with its own UI into this order. So here we could create, for example, an order. But what we're going to do in the demo today is we're basically going to create a complete custom UI into this order application. So our own order manager, so to speak. So let's just fill in a product. So for example, we want to order some fruits. So let's enter some fruits. And by the way, this entire form gets generated by live apps. We don't have to build that form. Then we search for the order type, and then we see that we currently have 2 orders in the system. So from here, we can have a look at the application, and we see in the meanwhile that everything is being created for us. So what has happened is we basically have a whole bunch of files created on our disk. So we can start up the application locally. And in the meanwhile, let's have a look at all of those files that are being created. So we have this folder called OSS-Demo. Inside of this folder, we'll basically have our Angular application. And inside of the Angular application, you'll find a package.json file with obviously all the Angular packages. But you also find packages that we've created ourselves as part of the TIBCO Cloud Starter Toolkit. And those packages are available on NPM. So if you go to NPM, you search for TIBCO, you'll find these packages. And they basically kind of form the connection between your Cloud Starter and the TIBCO clouds. So they provide you with the API calls, but they also provide you with custom, let's say, pieces of UI code. So for example, this home cockpit comes from that Angular package or from that NPM package, because the way Angular works is you basically extend the HTML tags. So you kind of create your own HTML tags, like for example, this home cockpit. So in the meanwhile, this application has started up, and we can click this link, and then we see that we have this application running locally. So now we got this application running on localhost. And when we start it up, it first goes to the splash screen. So from here, we can click to get into the application. And then we have some configuration on the application. And the first thing that we do is we select the live apps application that we want to use for this specific UI. So in this case, the My Orders application. So now we directly see that we have active cases in the system, and we basically find that order that we've just entered. So from here, we also get that generated form, and we can actually directly start working with that order application. So we can submit the order so it goes from one state to the next state. But we don't only want to work with this application, we can also change the configuration. So here, for example, we could change the title of the application. So currently it's called the OSS demo application. So let's now call it My Order application. So we change the title, and we basically save this configuration, and then we refresh the page, and now you'll see that the title of the application is being changed. Now, this configuration is stored in a section of the TIBCO Cloud called Shared State. And from our development environment, we can actually edit the shared state. So we can use the CLI. So if we go into the OSS demo folder and we run the CLI there, we can run a so-called watch command. And this watch command will export the shared state first. So the shared state is basically a set of JSON configuration for the for our application. And inside here now we have this general configuration, and we find here the application title. And because this file is being watched, we can now make a change to this title. And as soon as we save that, you will see that it gets updated to the TIBCO Cloud. So this change is now being sent to the TIBCO Cloud, to the shared state. And then we can refresh the page here. And then you'll basically see that now the title of the application is being changed. So this doesn't come from your disk. This actually comes from the TIBCO Cloud. Now we can make another change from here. Let's call it, for example, my new order application. And then from our local development environment, we can also refresh from the TIBCO Cloud. So we can basically run the R command to refresh, and then you will see in your local JSON file, we now have the my new order application. So in that way, you can kind of keep the configuration between the TIBCO Cloud and your own development environment in sync, and it becomes very easy to make configuration changes. Now, in the next demo, and by the way, we are following this tutorial that you can find online. So you can also go over these steps later and do all of these steps yourself as well after this demo if you want to. And let's make another small configuration change. Let's change the title of the application. So let's call it the order application. So here we're going to change the message there on top. Let's call it orders. Then we basically save this, and now you'll see that it's called orders. But next to configuration changes, we also want to actually make changes in the code. And because this app is running locally, we can basically say, okay, we want to add some HTML in here. So let's, for example, add an image to the left side of our screen. So we can basically paste in this image tag with some style, so it puts it on the left side of the screen. And we don't have to recompile the app. The nice thing about developing an Angular application is that as you make changes to your file, it basically gets picked up directly. So you can just change the HTML and you see the results directly on your screen. So for example, the image on the left here. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to bring in an analytical report. We want to bring in a Spotify report. And for that, we need the location of the Spotify report from the TIBCO Cloud. And we can actually do that with a simple command. So we can basically say, okay, we're going to paste in this command that will print out the location of all the Spotify reports. And you see that you can pass in the -A option, and the -A option basically provides answers to the command that you're running. So you can run a command completely verbose. That basically means no questions are being asked, but the answers are all being taken from these global answers that are being set. And now if we open up our TIBCO Cloud property file and we scroll all the way to the bottom, we'll basically see that we have the Spotify path being added. And we'll need this information later in order to add the Spotify report in. So the next thing that we will do is we're going to add in, we're going to list the Spotify reports. So we're going to have a list of the reports that are available in our library. And then we also have the option to replay this command. So here we see the actual Spotify report. And at the end, we have this feature called the recorder that basically replays the command. And here in the middle of your screen, and I won't show it now, but you also have the option to basically store these recordings into a file so you can replay them later. But you can also take the replay command, run it, and then you basically see that information on your screen. Now, the next thing that we're going to do, and Jeremy spoke about that earlier as well, is we're going to insert a schematic. So a schematic is an Angular kind of technology to, the schematic will basically ask you a number of questions, and then it will generate all the code for you. So it will generate HTML code, it will generate CSS code, Well, basically do some sort of code scaffolding. So in this case, we want to add a dashboard, and we just want to use the public demo Spotfire server. We want to use the basic expense analyzer dashboard. So we answer a number of these questions. And now what we see happening on the left is we get a whole bunch of files being generated. So we get our own Angular component. And like I was telling you earlier, Angular basically extends these HTML components. So now we have this home cockpit, and instead of using this Live Apps home cockpit, we can basically use the My Dashboard that we just generated. So we click that My Dashboard, then we close that tag as well. And then we can basically start up the application again. And then you will see that there is basically a Spotfire report being added to our application. So if we go to our local page, we open up that page again, we go to the splash screen, and then from here you will see the application that we had earlier, but now we've added in a Spotfire report, and we hardly had to do any coding for that. We just run the schematic. It asked a number of questions, and it basically generated this page that added the Spotfire report in. Now, in the last demo, we basically want to change this Spotfire report. So we have our local, or we have our cloud Spotfire library. And here we have this sales and marketing report. And we basically want to take this report and put it into our application. So what we will do for that is we first need the location of that report. So we got that information earlier. So we want to add that to that specific Spotfire pod. So we have the sales and marketing. And then we'll use that trick that we did earlier in order to change this report, which was watching the shared state. So we're going to run the same command as we did earlier to watch the shared state. It first will export the shared state. And next to the general config that I was showing you earlier, now you'll also see that you have this Spotfire configuration. And inside of the Spotfire configuration, you'll see the Spotfire server. And instead of using the demo Spotfire server, we want to use the cloud Spotfire server. So that's this URL. And then we want to use the analysis path that we got from our Spotfire server automatically. We paste that in. And because this file is being watched, the shared state is being updated automatically inside of the TIBCO Cloud. So we can refresh this page locally. And then you will see that instead of the demo Spotfire report, we're now using the Spotfire report from the TIBCO Cloud about the sales and marketing. And obviously, we could connect this Spotfire report to the Live Apps application that we have for orders. And then last but not least, we obviously also want to run this application or deploy this application on the TIBCO Cloud. And we can just run this command to say build and deploy. Then we'll get a URL back and also a cloud descriptor that has information on the version, etc. And then we can open up the application. And now you will see that the application that we just created in just over 10 minutes is now running on the TIBCO Cloud itself. So we basically created this entire application from scratch. We made some changes to the configuration. We also made some changes to the HTML by adding in this picture. And then we added in a Spotfire report and deployed that application to the TIBCO Cloud. And that kind of concludes the demo for today. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. And don't forget to scan all the QR codes in the game today.